And this is where the power steering pump pulley mounts over one of the water pump bolts. And there's a little flying V bracket that goes over the two water pump bolts to kind of reinforce the area where the power steering pump pulley mounts over the water pump. Kind of a tricky Ricky. Not too tight on those two bolts. And this is a photo depicting the completion of torquing down the connecting rod cap bolts onto the crankshaft journals. Crank is mounted, connecting rods and pistons mounted, new oil pump mounted. The timing gear sprocket has been mounted. The teeth side of the gear gets mounted closest to the block. The chain is turning close to the block side. The oil pump gear, made of brass, should be intact with no damage to the teeth. This is where I installed the time cert in the broken bolt hole where the crack was welded up, as you can see, where I used the stick, muggy weld stick rod, number 72 rod and number 77, where I welded inside of the crack also, not just outside. And then I took a flap disc and I shaved off the sealant that I used around the time cert, around the hole on the inside. I used sealant, and I shaved off the excess sealant and the time cert flush with the front of the block, so the mating surface is flush for the timing cover to go over. The weld on the inside of the hole, I used a die grinder to smooth out and polish the inside so I could see everything while I was doing the process welding. See if there was any crack remaining that I missed or anything, to do any touch up. The cracks you see in the photo around the water channel are from my phone glass screen cover that I dropped so many times that the screen is cracked. That's why there's so many fracture cracks in the photo. And this is a better view of the power steering pump mount bracket that partially mounts to two bolts over the two bolt holes of the water pump. So it's kind of strange that this is the design of the power steering pump mounting place over the water pump, but that's the way they did it. And the rest of the power steering mount goes to the side of the engine block. This was kind of tricky for me to put in place because I had to put the water pump on first with the sealant, new gasket, and immediately follow up with this flying V bracket connected to the power steering pump unit and torque all the bolts simultaneously. So it all had to be done in a fair amount of time. Torquing the two bolts was kind of tricky because this is a mounting bolts, not the major portion of mounting for the power steering pump, but it is nonetheless partial mounting for the power steering pump unit. So these don't get over tightened, the water pump bolts. So it's nothing really that critical. Just make sure that you tighten them properly. I think it's like 11 to 18 pounds of torque, not very much, but they do need to be snug because you don't want them coming loose. This is a tensioner pulley for the V-belt, and it's mounted to the power steering pump unit bracket. I did have to replace the bearing inside of this pulley. It was shot. There was no grease left in it. I think it was a sealed bearing, but it was wobbly. The bearing was shot, and I ended up replacing it with a standard open-sided bearing on both sides, and they just put a lot of red grease in it, and something that'll have to check, maybe re-grease later on. Comes off relatively easy with that one nut though, that one bolt that goes through it. I made sure that I bought a quality brand name replacement water pump, because you don't want to have to replace the water pump on this engine, because you'll end up having to loosen all the power steering mounting brackets and tensioner pulley to get to it. I did end up using some Belzona brand putty for cast iron repairs, like crack repairs. I didn't really need it, but I just wanted to make sure, because there was a pinhole, a very tiny pinhole where there was a little bubbling under water pressure when it was pressure tested, so the little bubbles were coming out. Nothing major, it wasn't a major leak, but I wanted to seal up if there were any kind of pinholes, causing some sort of fluid to leak out or bubble out. I wanted to make sure that the pinholes were sealed up. And this is a high quality cast iron repair compound, 2-part. And you usually take a brush, like a paintbrush, stiff bristles, and you force the bristle, the sharp end of the bristle on the paintbrush onto it, and you push it in. You make those bristles force that putty into those pinholes. I don't think I really needed to do this, but I just did it anyway, just for a little added peace of mind, security. And so far there's no leaks. I have decided to try this Belzona 1212 2-part epoxy compound out on this block that I have. This is a 4-cylinder engine block, and as you can see, I welded it up where there was a little crack around the water channel, and had it magnafluxed at the machine shop, pressure tested, and there was a couple tiny pinholes creating some little bubbles. That's what I decided to use the Belzona. And what we have in the kit is an applicator, two-part epoxy, resin hardener. You got screen mesh application after the first layer, and we've got a mixer putty knife. This is the block after I bought it and took it apart to inspect before I started the rebuild process. It looks like somebody put some sort of putty spots all over the deck face of the engine block, and I'm not sure why they did this. I don't know why they did it at all, actually, but this is not favorable or desirable to do because it could interfere with the sealing surface of the gasket, and you really just want bare clean metal on both surfaces of the gasket area, on the block and the face of the head. Has to be clean and flat, all metal. This could be why they ran into problems with the blown head gasket.